"Elvis, we need to talk." Colonel Parker's gruff voice snapped Elvis out of his daze as he sat slumped on the couch in his Vegas hotel suite. Elvis blearily looked up at his longtime manager looming over him. "What is it, Colonel?" he mumbled. The colonel's bushy eyebrows knitted together in a scowl. "You've been missing shows, laying around strung out on God knows what. This has got to stop. You've got obligations, a career to think about." Elvis winced and rubbed his temples. His head throbbed mercilessly, his body ached, and nausea churned in his gut, the aftereffects of last night's pharmaceutical binge. He knew the colonel was right, that his self-destructive behavior was getting out of hand. But the emptiness inside him, the inescapable loneliness, it drove him to seek solace in pills upon pills, uppers, downers, painkillers, anything to numb the ache in his heart. I know, Elvis said weakly. "I'm trying, Colonel, I really am. It's been hard since the divorce. I miss Scylla and Lisa Marie something awful." The colonel sighed. "I understand that, Elvis, but you can't let it destroy you like this. You've got to pull yourself together, son. For your daughter's sake, if nothing else." Elvis closed his eyes, his heart clenching at the thought of his little girl. Sweet Lisa Marie, with her big blue eyes so like his own. He'd do anything for her. But lately, he barely felt capable of doing anything for himself. The colonel continued. "Hook Stratton and I are looking into these doctors of yours, trying to figure out where you're getting all these drugs. This habit of yours could ruin everything we've built." "You leave that alone," Elvis snapped, suddenly angry. Didn't the colonel understand he needed the pills to function, to make it through the unending days of emptiness and despair? "I'm handling it." "Well, you better get it handled soon. The RCA deal is going through and we've got more shows booked. I need you in tip-top shape." The colonel turned to leave. "And for God's sake, clean yourself up. You look like hell." With that, he strode out, slamming the door behind him. Elvis slowly pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He stumbled to the bathroom, catching sight of himself in the mirror, pale, bloated, his eyes dull and lifeless. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. What had happened to the vibrant young singer who had set the world on fire with his voice and sensuous moves? He thought back to his recent Aloha from Hawaii satellite concert. Over 1 billion people had tuned in worldwide to see him in his glory. But it had taken a Herculean effort to get through that show, to pull himself together and summon even a flicker of his old fire. The rush of performing was like a drug itself, carrying him through, but he'd crashed hard afterward. Now, he was just so tired of the endless treadmill of shows, tired of the crippling loneliness, tired of trying to live up to his own impossible legend. Even his old loves and friendships couldn't seem to sustain him anymore. Seeing Anne Margaret again had ripped open an old wound. His heart still ached for the spirited beauty he'd let slip away. And Anita Wood, his sweet little... Hearing her gently scold that divorcing her had not been a mistake after all had crushed him. Even as he knew she was right, that too much had happened for them to ever recapture what they'd once had. Elvis stepped into the scalding spray of the shower, trying to shock himself back to some semblance of life. He had to get through today and tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. For Lisa Marie, for his fans, for the show to go on. As he emerged and toweled off, he resolutely pushed away morbid thoughts of his own mortality that had begun to plague him more and more. He was still young, only 38. As long as he had that, he told himself he'd be all right. Elvis picked up the phone to call down to the pharmacy with his latest prescription. Numbness was preferable to this pervasive despair. A few pills would get him through tonight's show. Then a few more to sleep. Somehow he'd make it to tomorrow. The roar of the crowd, the flashbulbs and spotlights nearly blinded Elvis as he strode out on stage later that night, clad in a flashy, bejeweled jumpsuit. The audience jumped to their feet, shrieking as the band launched into the opening vamp of C.C. Rider. He was running on little more than uppers and adrenaline, but that old black magic sparked through him as he grabbed the mic. "Well, I said C.C. Rider, oh, see what you have done." The gritty lyrics poured out of him like a moan born straight from his wounded heart. The crowd screamed and reached for him, transported by the raw emotion and power in his voice. For a little while at least, he was still Elvis the Pelvis, the king of rock and roll. Backstage after the show, Elvis sat slumped in a chair as the Memphis Mafia milled around, excitedly recapping the concert. "You killed it tonight, boss," Sonny West crowed. "Just like the old days." Elvis managed a weak smile even as his head swam and his heart galloped erratically in his chest. The post-show crash was hitting him hard. He needed to get back to the hotel, back to the pills that would bring blessed oblivion. "You okay, honey?" she asked softly. Elvis shrugged off her touch, the intimacy suddenly too much to bear. "I'm fine, Mommy. Just tired." The old childhood endearment slipped out unbidden. Worry clouded Linda's delicate features. Elvis knew his drug use troubled her deeply. Hell, it troubled him. But he needed that numbing cushion against the constant pain. No one understood that, not really, except maybe Gladys. But his beloved mother was long gone. "Time to head out, boss," Red West said. "The limo's waiting." Elvis allowed himself to be bundled into the waiting car. In the blessed privacy of the back seat, he fumbled with a pill bottle, hands shaking as he dry swallowed a fistful of capsules. He closed his eyes and waited for the haze to descend, to blur the sharp edges of his misery for a little while. Back at the hotel, Linda and Charlie Hodge gently deposited him into bed. Elvis felt the mattress shift as Linda climbed in beside him, wrapping her arms around his bloated frame. A shaft of guilt pierced him. He loved Linda as much as he was capable of loving any woman now. Her sweet devotion was a balm to his battered heart, but he feared it would never be enough to save him from himself. As he drifted into a narcotic stupor, Elvis's jumbled thoughts turned to his little girl, his Lisa Marie, his very heart and soul. He needed to pull himself together for her, to be the daddy she deserved. Tomorrow, he vowed hazily, he'd do better tomorrow. The next weeks passed in a blur of shows, pills and listless days sprawled in bed. Elvis knew he was losing his grip, sliding into a black abyss from which there might be no return. It was getting harder and harder to rally for his performances. Only chemical stimulation got him through. Terrifying bouts of paranoia gripped him. He became convinced that Priscilla's karate instructor boyfriend Mike Stone was plotting his assassination. Wild-eyed, waving a gun, he ordered Red to take out a hit on the man, much to the Memphis Mafia's alarm. It took all their powers of placation to talk him down. More distressing was Colonel Parker's new 50-50 deal. Elvis barely had the energy to care. All he wanted was to be left alone with his pills and his pain. It all came to a head that fall, when a nearly catatonic Elvis had to be rushed back to Memphis from Vegas. His breathing labored, his body swollen beyond recognition. Checked into Baptist Memorial Hospital, he endured an agonizing detox. His system purged of the toxins he'd been poisoning himself with for so long. He thought of his legacy, the music he'd made, the lives he'd touched. Could he throw all that away, allow himself to burn out like a dying star before his 40th birthday? In his darkest moments, part of him longed for that release, for the final fade to black. But then he thought of Lisa Marie, her childish voice begging, "Daddy, promise you won't die." He thought of the fans who still screamed for him, the audiences he could still electrify with the sheer power of his voice and presence. No, Elvis Aaron Presley would not go gently into that good night. He'd kicked this habit before, and he could do it again, if not for himself, then for those he loved and who loved him. He'd walk out of this hospital and prove to the world that the king was still the king. And he'd start by mending fences. He placed a call to Priscilla, asking her to bring Lisa Marie to visit. It was time to try to be a father again, a real father, not just an overindulgent dispenser of baubles and pricey gifts. His daughter's face lit up when she saw him, and she climbed up onto the bed to cuddle against him. "Missed you, Daddy," she said, wrapping her little arms around his neck. "Missed you too, baby," Elvis whispered, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. Glancing up, he was surprised to see tears glistening in Priscilla's eyes. "We need you around." Elvis nodded solemnly, his throat too tight to speak. He gathered Lisa Marie closer, determined to be there for her like he'd never been before. The road ahead would be hard harder than anything he'd faced yet. But with the love of his daughter, his family and friends, he'd find a reason to keep going. The music was still in him. The little boy who'd begged his mother for a guitar all those years ago was still there inside the weary, damaged man. That Elvis, young and vital and burning with the need to express himself in song, still had something to offer the world, and he intended to share it once more, for however long he could.